Welcome to the walkthrough of the Pursue tool. Hopefully by now you've seen the Pursue tool lesson in the Bionic course listing and you're on the lesson showing the three green buttons at the bottom of the page. The first takes you to the first part of the Pursue tool, which is the Organisational Self Assessment. The second is the RRI Intensity Level Assessment, or the RIL assessment, and the third combines part 1 and 2 into an action plan. For the first part of the Pursue tool, we'll be walking through the self-assessment, or the Organisational Self-Assessment. The first thing you'll see when you click on the Organisational Self-Assessment button is the brief preamble and terms and conditions of the self-assessment tool. Have a read through, but understand that all data is kept absolutely confidential, is limited to only your account and to the administrators of the website, and even then we can't associate a self-assessment with a specific user unless you absolutely agree to the terms. So we click on Next and we get taken to the first part of the Organisational Self-Assessment. Here it asks you if you would like to subscribe to the Orbit RRI newsletter. If you'd like to receive a regular newsletter showcasing everything that Orbit's doing, including the Orbit webinars, then please click Yes, subscribe me. The second question is, what is the name of your organisation or CDT? In this case, I'm going to put EPSRC IAA. This is only to assign the Organisational Self-Assessment to your account. So when you refer back to it, you can easily see which one is for which organisation. It then asks you a few questions with regards to your role in the organisation, how long you've been there, and what type of organisation you represent. These are entirely voluntary, and as such you don't need to answer them if you don't feel it's necessary. The same goes for the short description of the organisation. The most important, however, is the name of the project that you're doing the self-assessment or organisational self-assessment for. In this case, we're going to be talking about one of the case studies we regularly use on our Orbit workshops, which is offshore wind farms. It then asks you for a brief description of the project that you're assessing today. Again, this is entirely voluntary, as is the information regarding how the work is funded, and the brief questionnaire about responsible practices in your organisation. If you don't feel you wish to answer these questions, then it's perfectly fine to leave them out. However, we do find that taking the time to read these informs the later questions of the self-assessment study and therefore might well influence your answers a little more differently. Once completed, click on the Next button at the bottom of the page. The first bank of questions for the Organisational Self-Assessment deals with anticipation, which describes and analyses the impacts, intended or otherwise, that might arise. This does not seek to predict, but rather to support an exploration of possible impacts and implications that might otherwise remain uncovered and little discussed. It's important that you complete every single question in each part of the Organisational Self-Assessment and take some time to actually think about the answer that you're going to give. However, if you do feel at any point that this question is not relevant to your organisation, please tick the Not Relevant box. In this case, for this question, I'm looking at, do we have mechanisms in place to consider the likely consequences of our research? Now, as I'm quite new to this organisation, I don't know. So therefore, I'm going to choose that I neither agree or disagree. You'll notice that all of the other questions become greyed out and are now not clickable. If you wish to change your answer at any point, just uncheck and then recheck a box. So now I will continue to answer the rest of the questions on the page and we'll rejoin this when we have reached the reflection section. Once all of the questions have been answered for the anticipation section, we move on to reflection. And this reflects on the purposes of motivations for and potential impacts of the research and the associated uncertainties, areas of ignorance, assumptions, framings, questions, dilemmas, and social transformations that these may bring. Again, answer all of the questions in this section according to your organisation. The next bank of questions deals with the topic of engagement. Engagement opens visions, impacts and questioning to broader deliberation, dialogue, engagement and debate in an inclusive way. Again, please answer every question in this section. The bank of questions that follows deals with governance. Governance is all about the arrangements within an organisation or research institution that leads to acceptable and desired futures. In fact, governance instruments should foster a culture of shared responsibility and accountability among all actors. Please continue and answer every question in the governance section. Now we move on to the gender section of the organisational self-assessment. Gender is about promoting gender balance within the teams and in governance and decision-making bodies. This aspect of RRI implies always being aware of the gender dimension of research and innovation activities and its results. Again, please answer every question in this section. The following section discusses open science, which is freely available scientific work that can facilitate innovation and ensure a dialogue with social actors. As such, it's essential to address issues of ownership and accessibility of research and scientific work. Please complete every question within this section. The penultimate section of the organisational self-assessment discusses science education. This addresses the issue of educating and instructing all citizens to better equip them with scientific knowledge necessary to be engaged in research and innovation debates. Please answer both questions within this section. The final section of the organisational self-assessment is research ethics. This includes research integrity, data management, and making sure that the research process itself is carried in an appropriate way. Please answer all three questions within this section. Because of your involvement in the Bionic course, we also ask you later on to submit your organisational self-assessment so that we can present them to the entire cohort. Please choose that you would like this organisational self-assessment to be emailed to you by clicking the drop-down bar and selecting yes. This will ask you for your email address, which is not stored at all within the Orbit system and is only used to immediately send you a copy of the organisational self-assessment. Once done, click on Submit your self-assessment. Once you have finished your organisational self-assessment, please close the window down and return back to the Pursue Tool lesson within the Bionic course. The next section is the RRI Intensity Level Assessment. Please click on the button and then follow the instructions. The RRI Intensity Level Survey, or the RIL survey, deals with your project and your organisation and discusses things like the Sustainable Development Goals. Please read through all of the preamble of the RRI Intensity Level Assessment before we begin. The first question that's asked is, what is the name of your project? Again, this is something you need to be quite specific about, as you may refer to it back in your account later, and also as part of the action plan too. In this case, my project is regarding offshore wind farms, and my organisation will be EPSRC IAA. Now, we do require a detailed use case for this project, and we do offer a link on how best to fill out this section here. For now, I'm going to leave this section blank, but please be as detailed as possible so that we can review this information later. As we move on, we will reach the section discussing the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, were created by the United Nations to be universal goals, targets and indicators that UN member states are expected to use to frame their agendas and political policies over the next 12 years. This tool uses the Sustainable Development Goals as a widely adopted measure of social goods, and therefore it's a useful metric against which to measure the potential impact of technology and assess the level of required responsible innovation work. The impact encompasses both positive and negative impact. For example, GM crops that are beneficial for increasing food supply, but they may have a negative impact on the environment. We ask you to look through the Sustainable Development Goals and choose the goals that are appropriate to your project. In my example project regarding offshore wind farms, we're going to look through the Sustainable Development Goals and decide which ones will probably apply to my project. For example, industry, innovation and infrastructure, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption, climate action, and finally, partnerships for the goal. Each of the Sustainable Development Goals will then create a series of questions below. Please follow through each of these questions and answer as in-depth as you possibly can. In this instance, we're going to look at the first one I selected, which is evaluating the impact. When thinking about the impact on Sustainable Development Goals, can you indicate the impact is either positive or negative? Also, when considering the impact, is it possible at this time to provide a numerical level of impact on the Sustainable Development Goal? And if so, can you provide sources for this quantified impact? The first question in each section for each development goal is please select whether your project has a positive or negative impact on the associated SDG. In this case, for industry, innovation and infrastructure, I'm going to select that it has a positive impact. The second question is what type of impact does your product have on the associated SDG? Now, in this case, I'm going to choose that it has a quantified impact. We then have to give a reason as to why this associated SDG has a quantified impact. If you have sources, please copy and paste them into this box. You will then see, as you move further down the page, that all of the previous SDGs have also generated questions too. Please complete every question here as it's important as we move on through the RIL survey. The next level of the RRI intensity level is the technology readiness level. To be effective, RRI needs to be embedded in the research process, but we posit at an appropriate level of intensity proportional to the stage that the research is attempting to reach. Technology readiness level is one development pathway for new technologies. These give a common reference point when considering the level of development of a given technology has achieved. Here you will select the target technology readiness level at the end of your project. If you need further explanation, we've included 2 links that you can click on that will further expand on this question. In this instance, for the offshore wind farms example, I'm going to select TRL 5, that we have completed a large-scale prototype tested in its intended environment. Scrolling down the RRI intensity level survey, we will reach the expert RRI review. There is a simple question here, but it's possibly one of the most important on the survey. Do you, your team, or your peers think the technology might have the potential to pose significant risk or benefits which are not encompassed by the Sustainable Development Goals? Again, we've included a link should you need further explanation on this question. Click the drop-down button and select your answer. In this case, I'm going to select No. Finally, because you are part of the Bionic course, we would ask that you have a copy of this report emailed to you. Again, click the drop-down and select Yes, and then enter your email address. Once completed, click the button. Once the following page has been loaded, you will be presented with your RRI Maturity Report, which gives you a breakdown of what you answered and how you answered throughout the intensity level survey. The SDGs that I selected in my example and whether I selected they were quantified or unquantified. You will also see each of the answers that I gave to each of the questions, in this case using mostly example, and then you will see the calculation of the innovation potential. You will see how we calculate your innovation potential, how we calculate your RRI intensity level, and how we cross-reference both of those to arrive at the level of your project. In this case, the RRI intensity level has calculated my project is RIL 5, which is organisation has adopted RRI as a component of its strategic framework and aims to ensure all research and development activities cover all or most of the RRI components. The RRI intensity level survey has now been completed. You can close this window and return back to the Pursue Tool lesson as part of the Bionic course. Returning back to the Pursue Tool lesson as part of the Bionic course, we then click on the third and final button that generates the action plan, which goes and combines parts of the Organisational Self-Assessment with the RRI Intensity Level Assessment. The action plan generator combines your Organisational Self-Assessment with your RRI Maturity Assessment from your account. The first two boxes you will see will ask you to select a project self-assessment or organisational self-assessment that you have completed, and also an RRI Maturity Assessment that you've also completed. In this instance, I have only completed the offshore wind farms organisational self-assessment, so I select that from the list. However, if you have completed more than one self-assessment, all of these will be displayed here for you, and you can search for them using the search box here. I'm going to go ahead and click on offshore wind farms, and we will see a message appear that tells us that the self-assessment has successfully loaded. We do the same for the RRI Maturity Assessment. Once you've received a message that both the self-assessment and RIL assessment have been successfully loaded, the questions below will have changed according to your scores. Here we recognise any gaps that might appear between your RRI intensity level and your organisational self-assessment, and we ask questions to detail how you're going to improve each of these areas. Please complete every one of these questions. The next section of the action plan generator are more generic questions about you and how you're going to complete these improvements. The first question is what resources are needed for you to complete these improvements. We suggest things like skills improvements and associated costs. Please be as detailed here as possible. The next question deals with the project deliverables, again requiring you to be as detailed as possible. The third question asks you what the RRI governance organisation and processes applied will be. Again, please be as detailed as possible. Finally, we ask, because you are part of the Bionic course, that you send a copy of this to your email address. Click yes in the drop-down box and enter your email address. Once done, please click on Submit. The RRI Action Plan will show you the project self-assessment that you used and the RRI Maturity Assessment that you used. It will also show you where gaps occurred and how you answered each of the questions. This has now been saved to your account. Once all three sections of the Pursue tool have been completed, you will have received 3 emails in your inbox. We ask you to export these emails as either a PDF or copy and paste them into a document and upload them as part of the assignment for the Bionic course. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope it's been helpful.